I guess the demographic shifts, generational shifts that we're going through right now within Europe and many of the things which are happening on the outside, how should they be reflected in some of the things that we are doing in our museums today? Are those things that we should be collecting as ethnographic museums? How should we collect them? Should we collect them, just by ourselves in a mono-authoritarian voice, or should we be collecting in different ways? And I guess that's kind of what we want to explore in the next couple of days.
The importance of collaborating and developing partnerships and/or collecting with Native people is critical to the understanding, presentation, and interpretation of Native American culture. Part of the idea of NMAI 1.0 is to have Native communities bring their own voice to the visitors through the exhibition. So the UPIC were involved at every single level within the exhibition.
We organize what we call, well, you can call expert meetings. In the expert meetings, we also invite our storytellers, because they're as much an expert as the academics or the museum professionals. So therefore, in everything we do, we invite all to participate and to have a voice. This is one of the examples of an evening on sharing food and cooking food for others. It was around food traditions and sharing that traditions with others, but also using food to bring other things to the table.
I just went there and I started talking with people about the collection. I brought the old photographs of the old collection with me and started to set up sessions with what they would imagine I could buy. In the end, I went along with two women who helped me buy many objects in Jeddah. Traditional objects and very contemporary objects in very different spheres and in very different areas of Jeddah.
The social turn is now firmly established in museum practice, and any questions about the actual ability of our clunky, bureaucratic, historically grounded and chronically underfunded buildings and collections to fulfill this agenda are resolutely brushed under the carpet.
How do we co-collect? Now, historically, it's been through formal advisory groups that have been associated with exhibitions and different kinds of work at the museum. When I think back over our work, one of the earliest examples of a Pacific person coming forward and making some kind of statement of what he felt should be collected was the Reverend Langi Sapali. Now, he came out and gave us this paint tin drum from Niue, known as a palau. And back in 1995 or 6 or whenever it came in, I was, I was new to the museum. I'd only been there since '92, and to see something like this presented was a real oddity, hard to deal with. It's a paint tin. It's not the most beautiful thing, but how could I say no to the Niuean representative of our advisory group, who also happened to be a pastor? And he really looked smart, and he was one of the great guys. He had a big white beard, great beard. So, this knowledgeable man had presented this to me as part of the, to be in the collections. How could I say no? There's a certain obligation for us to say yes. Because if we didn't say yes, we'd question this person who we appointed to the advisory group. We'd question their credibility as a community representative. We'd question their cultural authority. These shoes here, why are they here? And I used them to tell us the story of, I was able to tell the story of how at the end of last year, I got a phone call from a guy who said, hey, my name is Vasata Sele. A few months ago, I walked the length of New Zealand raising money for charity. I think I might be the first Pacific Islander, if not the first Samoan, to walk the length of New Zealand. Do you want my shoes? And I said, okay, hold on a minute. So we had a talk about it, and I said, can you please send me an email, show me what the shoes look like, and give me some backstory. And while he did that, I did some research myself and found out he could well be the first Samoan Pacific person to walk the length of the country. Why not tell that story through a Samoan person's shoes? It's the first set that we've been offered. So, they won't make it probably into any exhibition of Pacific art, but they do tell a social history story and through a Samoan's experience. So we accepted the donation. They're part of the collection, and they who knows how they might find use in the future, what stories they could tell.
The project was about bringing indigenous community from Brazil in contact with the European collections. And to be really honest, I mentioned that sometimes it's a very big problem to get financial resources for projects like this, to invite people. It was much more easier to get money for acquisitions. And so we said, okay, we're inviting the people to come to Europe, and they bring as a present a new collection. Yeah, so that was the deal. Yeah, and this is important to remember, because some of my colleagues ask me, are these objects really worth the money? Because they thought it was an acquisition and it was so expensive, they didn't see that it's more than just an acquisition, but it's also a project, and that we try to make a collaborative thing.
But the way that it was presented to us is that people in Brazil had indicated that after seeing photos from our collections, from the European collections, they said, we do not feel like that we are being represented well in your collections. We want to make new collections for you, new acquisitions for you, where we feel better represented in your collections.
Alfred Gell posits a world in which objects do things. And this is not a form of magical thinking by native people. We would not have museums if we didn't think that objects speak across time and culture. The whole point of museums is that objects have tremendous social power. In museums, we live with these objects all the time. So our museum has a special area, sacred storage area, and in that room there are objects like this on every shelf, and when I visit them, which I do fairly frequently, I talk to them all, and you know, it's just casual, but I make sure if there are Ojibwe speakers in the museum that they come and speak to them. And once a year we have a smudge that is specifically for them. And in the last little while we've actually used objects that were part of our collection but are in that sacred storage area for exhibits. And the entire premise is that these are person-like things, and that in order for them to be a part of an exhibit, they need to be invited the way a person needs to be invited. And their friends and relations need to be involved the way you would involve relations of another individual. And it works amazingly well, because there are lots of people who, once invited, are happy to participate in an event which respects the personhood of these sacred or these ceremonial objects. And
another issue that came up is the issue of showing images of people who have passed away. It's kind of a common, well, something that you hear that occurs very regularly in Australia, is this kind of blanket statement saying that that images of people who have died shouldn't be shown. And I saw that this was probably the case in the past, in the 80s, where, for example, Victoria Burbank, even when she was writing about people who had passed away, didn't mention the names just because they had passed away. But here in this project I found that this wasn't really an actual problem today, because people talked very freely about, for example, this boy who was now a man and who had just passed away very recently. So some of the questions that came up during this project is, who should be allowed to access the images? How can the images be made relevant today? What can the images teach us? And with us, I mean everyone, not just the museum people, but also the people in Numbulwa. How do we archive the knowledge created by sharing these images? And where do we archive this created knowledge?